The morning air bit with autumn's first chill when Lillian Farrow stepped onto the boardwalk of Idaho City, Idaho, clutching her black shawl tighter around her shoulders as whispers followed her like shadows. Two wedding bands hung on a chain beneath her high-necked blouse, hidden from view but weighing heavier than gold had any right to. "There she goes again," came the inevitable whisper, not quite soft enough to escape her ears. "The Black Widow of Idaho City." Lillian kept her chin high, though the words stung like salt in a fresh wound. At 26, she'd buried two husbands, already Thomas to consumption 3 years prior and James to a mining accident just 4 months ago. The town's sympathy had run dry after the second funeral, replaced by suspicion and cruel speculation. She made her way to Donovan's general store, steeling herself for the interaction to come. The bell above the door announced her arrival, and the soft murmur of conversation died instantly. "Mrs. Farrow," Mr. Donovan greeted stiffly from behind the counter. "What can I get for you today?" "I need flour, coffee, and some sugar if you have it," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite the stares boring into her back. As Mr. Donovan gathered her items, Mrs. Peterson leaned over to Mrs. Wilkins, her voice carrying deliberately, "Wonder how long this one will last. Poor man won't know what hit him." Lillian's hands trembled slightly as she counted out her coins. "That should cover it." "It's short by 2 cents, Mr. Donovan said, not meeting her eyes. Lillian checked her small purse again, dismay washing over her. She was certain she'd brought enough. "I can cover that," came a deep voice from behind her. Lillian turned to find herself looking up at a tall stranger, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the window. Dust from the trail still clung to his clothes, marking him as newly arrived. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "That's not necessary," she began, but he was already placing the coins on the counter. "Happy to help, madam." He tipped his hat. "Name's Kieran Powell, just rode in from Montana Territory." "Lillian Farrow," she replied hesitantly. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Powell, but I don't accept charity." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Not charity, consider it an investment in neighborly goodwill." Mrs. Peterson snorted behind them. "You'd best be careful, Mrs. Farrow has a habit of becoming a widow with alarming regularity." The store fell silent, the cruelty of the words hanging in the air. Lillian's face burned with humiliation. Kieran's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes as he turned to face the gossiping women. "Is that so?" he asked mildly. "Well, then I'll stay until you're done losing." Lillian's breath caught in her throat. No one had defended her since James died. Gathering her purchases and what remained of her dignity, she nodded briefly to Kieran before hurrying out of the store. She was halfway down the street when his footsteps caught up to her. "Mrs. Farrow," he called. "You forgot your sugar." Lillian stopped, composing herself before turning. "Thank you again, Mr. Powell." "Those women had no right," he said, handing her the small paper package. "They've made up their minds about me," Lillian replied, surprising herself with her candor. "This town has little else to talk about besides a woman with the misfortune to lose 2 husbands." "Misfortune, not fault," Kieran noted. "There's a difference." "Not to them." She looked up at him properly now, noting the sun-weathered skin and the quiet strength in his stance. "You're new here, you'll soon learn I'm not worth defending." "I make my own judgments, Mrs. Farrow." His smile was gentle. "And I've found that those most condemned by town gossips are often the ones most worth knowing." Despite herself, Lillian felt a flutter of something she thought had died with James' interest in another human being. "You're either very kind or very foolish, Mr. Powell." "I've been called worse." He tipped his hat again. "Good day, Mrs. Farrow." Lillian watched him walk away, tall and steady, before continuing to her small house at the edge of town. The property had been Thomas's pride, a modest home with a small stable and enough land for a garden. James had maintained it during their brief marriage, and now Lillian struggled to keep it from falling into disrepair. She was hanging her laundry the next morning when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Kieran Powell rode toward her house, leading a second horse loaded with supplies. "Good morning, Mrs. Farrow," he called as he dismounted. "I noticed your fence could use some mending. Thought I might offer my services." Lillian straightened, pin still in her hand. "Mr. Powell, while I appreciate the gesture, I can't afford to hire help." "Not looking to be hired," he replied. "Looking to be neighborly." We're not neighbors, she pointed out. Not yet, he smiled. I've just purchased the old Wilson place down the road. Lillian's eyes widened. The Wilson property had been vacant for nearly a year, a decent parcel of land with a house that needed work. You're settling here, in Idaho City, planning to raise horses, he said. Good grazing land, fair water rights, seems as good a place as any. Lillian wasn't sure what to say. No one had voluntarily moved to Idaho City in some time. The gold rush had peaked years ago, leaving behind those too stubborn or too broke to move on. The fence, he prompted. She hesitated. Pride warred with practicality. The fence did need fixing, and winter would come soon enough. I can pay you in meals, she offered finally. I may be a widow twice over, but I'm a decent cook. Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps. Deal, he said, extending his hand. Lillian hesitated before taking it. His palm was calloused but warm, the grip firm without being forceful. For the next week, Kieran came every morning to work on her property. He mended the fence, repaired loose boards on the porch, and fixed the leak in the stable roof. Lillian found herself watching him from the kitchen window as she prepared their midday meals, studying the easy confidence in his movements. Were you always a horseman? She asked over stew one day. Grew up on a ranch in Texas, he replied. Drove cattle until I saved enough for my own place. Tried my hand at a few things since then. What brought you to Idaho? Kieran's eyes met hers. A new start, he said simply. Sometimes a man needs to leave the past behind. Lillian understood that all too well. The past has a way of following, she warned softly. So does gossip, he countered. I heard more about you at the saloon last night, her spoon stilled. I imagine you did. They say your first husband died suspiciously, that the second one's accident wasn't so accidental. And what do you think, Mr. Powell? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I think grief etches itself differently on every face, he said, and yours speaks of loss, not guilt. The simple statement unlocked something in Lillian's chest. For the first time since James's death, she found herself telling someone the whole story, how Thomas had withered away before her eyes, how James had taken a job in the most dangerous part of the mine to provide for her, how both times she'd been left alone with nothing but debts and whispers. I loved them both, she finished. Not the same way, but I did. I believe you, Kieran said. It was the first time anyone had. As autumn deepened, Kieran's presence became a constant in Lillian's life. He would work on his own property in the mornings, then ride over to help with whatever needed doing at hers. The townspeople watched with a mixture of fascination and morbid anticipation. Placing bets on how long you'll last, Sheriff Miller told Kieran one day at the general store, loud enough for everyone to hear. Is that so? Kieran replied evenly. Perhaps you should focus on law enforcement instead of encouraging slander, Sheriff. The older man's face darkened. Just friendly concern for a newcomer. Your concern is noted, Kieran said, and unnecessary. Word of the exchange reached Lillian before Kieran did. When he arrived at her house that afternoon, she was waiting on the porch. You shouldn't antagonize the sheriff on my account, she said without preamble. I didn't, Kieran replied. I antagonized him on principle. Despite her worry, Lillian found herself smiling. You're too stubborn for your own good. Pot kettle, he said with a grin. Then more seriously, Lillian, I've been meaning to ask you something. It was the first time he'd used her given name. Yes, the Harvest Festival is next week. Would you consider attending with me? The invitation took her by surprise. She hadn't attended any town social functions since James's funeral. The entire town will be there, she said hesitantly. All the more reason to have someone at your side. He stepped closer. Unless you'd rather not be seen with me. That's not it at all, she protested. But you're building a life here. My reputation could damage yours. Kieran laughed, the sound warm in the crisp air. My reputation can take care of itself. It's your company I'm interested in. The night of the Harvest Festival arrived clear and cool, stars pricking the dark Idaho sky. Lillian wore her best dress navy blue rather than black, a small rebellion against expectation. When Kieran arrived with his wagon, she felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with town gossip and everything to do with the appreciation in his eyes. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. She accepted his hand into the wagon, conscious of the curious eyes watching from neighboring houses. The town square was transformed with lanterns and autumn decorations, tables laden with food contributed by each family. Conversations faltered as Kieran helped Lillian from the wagon, but he kept her hand tucked in the crook of his arm as they moved through the crowd. "Mrs. Farrow," Mayor Bennett greeted stiffly, "didn't expect to see you tonight." "Mr. Powell was kind enough to escort me," Lillian replied, fighting the urge to shrink beneath the stairs. "Indeed." The mayor's wife eyed Kieran. "You're quite brave, Mr. Powell." "Not at all," Kieran replied smoothly. "Just fortunate in my companion." He led Lillian away before Mrs. Bennett could respond, guiding her toward the musicians setting up near the dance area. "You don't have to do this," Lillian whispered. "Do what?" Kieran's eyes were innocently wide. "Defend me at every turn, challenge every slight." "Would you rather I didn't?" The question gave her pause. For so long she had faced the town's judgment alone. Having someone stand beside her was unfamiliar but not unwelcome. "No," she admitted softly, "but I don't want to be your charity case either." "Is that what you think this is?" Kieran looked genuinely surprised. Lillian, his words were interrupted by the first strains of music. Couples began to move toward the dance area. "Dance with me," he said instead, offering his hand. Lillian hesitated only briefly before taking it. As Kieran led her into the dance, she was acutely aware of the whispers, the stares, the judgment, but for the first time in months, she found she didn't care quite so much. "They're all watching us," she murmured as they moved in time to the music. "Let them," Kieran replied. "Perhaps they'll learn something." "What would that be?" His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "That life goes on, that happiness isn't something to be suspicious of, that a woman who's known loss deserves joy without judgment." Lillian's heart beat faster at his words. "You make it sound so simple." "It could be," he said softly, "if you wanted it to be." The moment hung between them, full of possibility, until a commotion near the food tables broke the spell. Sheriff Miller's voice rose above the music, slurred with whiskey. "There she is, everyone." The Black Widow with her next victim. Kieran's body tensed, but Lillian laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. The sheriff staggered closer, pointing an unsteady finger. "How long you think this one'll last, folks? Christmas? Maybe spring if he's lucky." "That's enough, Miller," Mayor Bennett said, stepping forward. "Enough," the sheriff laughed bitterly. "Tell that to Thomas and James. She buried 2 good men and we're just standing around watching her set her sights on a third." The music had stopped. Every eye in the square was fixed on their tableau. "You're drunk, Sheriff," Kieran said evenly. "Go home before you say something you can't take back." "Or what?" Miller sneered. "You'll end up in the ground too." Something snapped in Lillian, then not fear or shame, but anger. Pure, cleansing anger that had been buried beneath grief for too long. "How dare you," she said, her voice clear in the silence. "How dare you use my husband's names to hurt me? Thomas died in my arms after months of suffering. I nursed him day and night. And James," her voice caught. "James worked himself to death trying to provide for us because no one in this town would give me fair work after Thomas died. You all whispered that I somehow caused their deaths, when in reality I would have given anything to save them." She took a step toward the sheriff. "You want to know what killed my husband, Sheriff? Disease and poverty, the same things that kill most people in these parts. The only difference is that when it happened to me twice, you all decided it made for better gossip than simple bad luck." The silence that followed was absolute. Sheriff Miller's face had gone pale beneath his whiskers. "Mrs. Farrow," Mayor Bennett began awkwardly. Perhaps nothing," Kieran interrupted. "Mrs. Farrow has endured enough judgment from this town. Anyone with further comments can direct them to me." He offered Lillian his arm again, and with her head high, she took it. Together they walked through the parting crowd, past the shocked faces and averted eyes, to his waiting wagon. They rode in silence until they reached Lillian's house. When Kieran helped her down, his hands lingered at her waist. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have lost my temper," Lillian replied, though she felt oddly light, as if a burden had lifted. "You didn't lose anything. You reclaimed your story." His eyes searched hers in the moonlight. "No one has the right to use your pain against you." Lillian was suddenly aware of how close they stood, of the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her dress. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly, "for everything." "Lillian," he began, then stopped. "I should go." Yes, she agreed, though she made no move to step away. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. "Good night," he said. She watched his wagon disappear down the road, her thoughts a tumult of confusion and newfound hope. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Mrs. Bennet knocked on Lillian's door, accompanied by several women from the church auxiliary. "We've come to apologize, Mrs. Bennet said stiffly when Lillian answered, "and to invite you to join our quilting circle next week." Lillian was too stunned to respond immediately. "What you said last night," Mrs. Peterson added, looking uncomfortable, "about nursing your first husband. I lost my sister to consumption." "I know what that's like. And my Henry works in the mine," another woman said. "Every day I worry." It wasn't a complete transformation. There was still awkwardness in their manner, still years of gossip between them, but it was a beginning. Lillian accepted their invitation with grace, if not complete trust. Later that day, when Kieran arrived, she told him about the visit. "It seems you made quite an impression," he said, smiling. "We did," she corrected. "Your defense of me hasn't gone unnoticed either." They worked side by side in her garden that afternoon, preparing it for winter. The companionable silence between them was new, laced with unspoken possibilities that neither seemed ready to voice. "I've been thinking," Kieran said finally, as the sun began to sink toward the mountains. "My house is larger than I need." Lillian glanced at him, uncertain where this was leading. "The work is coming along well," he continued, "but it needs a woman's touch, and your garden skills far surpass mine. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Powell?" She asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the sudden racing of her heart. "No, Lillian," he turned to face her fully. "I'm offering you a choice. A choice to start again. With me." His expression was serious now, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "I didn't come to Idaho City by accident. I heard about a widow who stood on her own despite everything. I wanted to meet the kind of woman who could endure such loss and still have the strength to face each day." Lillian stared at him. "You came here because of me." "I came here looking for something I'd lost," he said. "Hope, purpose, and I found it in you." "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know enough." He reached for her hand. "I know you loved deeply and lost greatly. I know you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. I know I want to build something with you if you'll let me." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "Kieran, I'm afraid. What if I'm next?" His smile was gentle. "Remember what I said that first day? I'll stay until you're done losing. I meant it." Those were just words to silence gossips. "No," he stepped closer. "They were a promise, one I intend to keep." The winter that followed was the harshest in Idaho City's memory. Snow piled high around the houses and the mountain passes closed early. But inside Kieran's home, their home now, warmth prevailed. They had married quietly in late November, with Mayor Bennet officiating and a small gathering of townspeople as witnesses. Some had come out of genuine goodwill, others out of curiosity. Lillian wore a dress of deep burgundy, and Kieran couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. "Are you sure?" she had asked him one last time the night before their wedding. "The gossip may die down, but it will never truly go away." "I've never been more sure of anything," he'd answered, drawing her into his arms. "Let them talk, we know the truth." As winter gave way to spring, Lillian found herself watching Kieran with a mixture of love and lingering fear. Each time he rode out to check their growing herd of horses, a small part of her worried he wouldn't return. Each night when he came back safely, the fear receded a little more. "You're doing it again," he said one evening, catching her studying his face across the dinner table. "Doing what?" she asked innocently. "Memorizing me as if I might vanish." He reached for her hand. "I'm right here, Lillian. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she said, trying to believe it completely. "Old habits." Kieran's eyes softened. "Come here," he said, pulling her onto his lap despite her mock protests. "I have something for you." From his pocket, he produced a small wooden carving a horse in mid-gallop, exquisitely detailed. "I've been working on it in the evenings," he explained. "It's no diamond ring, but it's perfect," Lillian interrupted, tracing the smooth contours with her fingertip. "When did you learn to carve?" "My father taught me, said a man should create beauty when he can." He hesitated. "I thought maybe I could teach our children someday." Lillian's breath caught. They hadn't spoken much of children, though she knew Kieran wanted them. After losing 2 husbands, the thought of bringing new life into the world terrified her as much as it tempted her. Our children, she repeated softly, testing the words. Only if you want, he assured her quickly. Only when you're ready. Lillian turned in his arms to face him fully, and if I'm ready now, the hope that blazed in his eyes made her heart swell. Are you saying? I'm saying, she whispered, taking his hand and placing it over her abdomen, that your carving might have a recipient sooner than you planned. Kieran stared at her, understanding dawning slowly. Lillian, are you? She nodded, tears spilling over. Dr. Winters confirmed it yesterday. I'm with child. With a whoop of joy, Kieran stood, lifting her in his arms and spinning her around the kitchen. A baby, he kept saying. Our baby. Later, as they lay in bed, his hand protectively covering the still flat plane of her stomach, Lillian voiced the fear she couldn't quite shake. What if history repeats itself? What if something happens to you and I'm left alone again? Kieran propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with a seriousness that matched her own. Lillian, listen to me. I can't promise I'll live forever. No one can. But I can promise that as long as I have breath in my body, I will fight to come home to you and our child. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. And if the worst should happen, which it won't, you wouldn't be alone. You've made a place for yourself in this town. You've shown them who you really are. It was true, Lillian realized. Over the months, she had rebuilt relationships, forged new ones. Mrs. Peterson now saved the best fabric scraps for her. Sheriff Miller had apologized, awkwardly but sincerely. Her quilting circle had become a group of genuine friends. Besides, Kieran added with a smile, this baby is half me and half you. That's a combination too stubborn to give up on. Lillian laughed, the sound chasing away the shadows. Poor child. Lucky child, he corrected, kissing her softly. To have you as its mother. Their son was born the following autumn, with Kieran pacing outside the bedroom door until Dr. Winters finally allowed him in to see his wife and child. They named him Samuel, after Kieran's father, and he had his mother's eyes and his father's determined chin. Word spread quickly through Idaho City. By evening, the porch was filled with visitors bringing food and gifts, the same community that had once shunned Lillian now celebrating the new life she and Kieran had created. He's beautiful, Mrs. Bennett said, cradling the infant. A perfect blessing. Lillian watched her son being passed from neighbor to neighbor, Kieran's steadying hand never far from her shoulder. She thought of Thomas and James, of the grief that had nearly consumed her, of the judgment that had followed. And she thought of Kieran, riding into her life with his quiet strength and unwavering faith in her. You were right, she told him that night as they watched Samuel sleep in the cradle Kieran had crafted. About staying until I was done losing. How so? He asked, his arm warm around her waist. Because I'm not losing anymore, she said. I'm gaining. Every day with you, with our son, it's a gift I never thought I'd have again. Kieran's kiss tasted of promise and possibility. This is just the beginning, he murmured against her lips. We have a lifetime ahead of us. And for the first time since she'd become a widow at 23, Lillian believed in that lifetime with her whole heart. 5 years later, on a summer evening with the Idaho mountains purple against the sky, Lillian sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Kieran teach Samuel to ride his first pony. Their 3-year-old daughter, Eleanor, played at her feet while baby Thomas slept in her arms. Mama, look. Samuel called, sitting tall in the saddle as Kieran led the pony in a circle. I'm riding by myself. I see you, darling, Lillian called back. You're doing wonderfully. Pride swelled in her chest as she watched her family, the family she'd once thought impossible after so much loss. Kieran caught her eye across the yard and smiled, that same smile that had first given her hope in a general store years ago. Later, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars emerge. Happy? He asked, as he did most evenings. Completely, she replied, resting her head against his chest. Though we might need to expand the house again if we keep adding to our family. Kieran chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. I'm game if you are. Lillian smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them here from a widow mocked by her community to a woman surrounded by love and possibility. They don't call me the Black Widow anymore, she mused. I wonder what they call me now, Mrs. Powell, Kieran said simply. The woman with the finest horses in Idaho territory, the most beautiful children in town, and a husband who still can't believe his luck. Lillian tilted her face up to his. And I'm the lucky one, she whispered, because you stayed. And I always will, he promised, sealing the words with a kiss as the stars watched over Idaho City and the family that had found hope where others had seen only loss.